Hi, I'm David Brown. This is presentation number 8 of the industrial complex that is Jershon. We have spent, this is the fourth of a series of presentations that we have spent specifically on the Ammonites, the converted Lamanites, and their story. And while we have bits and pieces of it in the Book of Mormon, and it is a very compelling story what's included in the Book of Mormon, the archaeology is fleshing out a so much larger picture, and the scale of the impact of these newly converted people is really much grander than what we understand from the Book of Mormon. So today we want to put together all those pieces. Some of what we will bring today is speculation, but again, we try not to speculate without having solid inferences that is founded on archaeology and research that's been done in Central America. So today, that's what we're going to look at, and putting all the pieces together for this industrial complex that is Jershon. The Book of Mormon's story of the converted Lamanites, who were later known as the Ammonites and the anti-Nephi Lehi, is very moving because of the testimony of their covenant that totally transformed their lives. They vowed to never again take up arms against their fellow man, even at the expense of their own lives. Many of them demonstrated their devotion by prostrating themselves before their attackers and dying at their hand. So far, we have uncovered several remarkable evidences of these devoted people. We will now review even more compelling evidences of the industry and events that led to the ambitious rise of Amalickiah. We will see that he was motivated by a desire greater than the aspiration to fulfill his royal destiny. First, we note that the king of the Lamanites relocated his place of rule from KAMINALJUYU in the Guatemala highlands to TIKAL in the lowlands. This is the king of all the Lamanites, the father of King Lamoni. When he converted to the gospel, he moved his place of influence and moved it down to TIKAL. This was done to bring the two kingdoms closer together so that the Lamanites might learn the language and spiritual teachings of the Nephites. But the attack on converted Lamanite royalty deposed the born-again ruler and placed the entire Lamanite nation in disarray. Now, it wasn't the king of all the Lamanites, the father of Lamoni, who was killed. It was his successor, King anti-Nephi Lehi, who probably was a brother of Lamoni's, who was put on the throne, and he was killed. When that happened, the entire Lamanite nation went into chaos. The need to protect the Ammonites initiated the move into the land of Jershon. All of these converted cities, 7 of them we're told, moved from the highlands then into the lowlands on the east coast there in what is called the Land of Jershon. We have identified that as modern-day Belize. And the addition of the Zoramites from Antionum developed adversarial neighbors from both the north and the south. So with taking on the Zoramites who were being converted, they're coming in from the Rio Bec area on the north. And so now the people in the land of Jershon, they're kind of surrounded. They not only have adversaries on the south that the Nephite armies are trying to protect them from, they also have them now from the north. And this makes it a strategic nightmare for the Nephites. These continuing issues prompted the Nephites to offer a land close to Zarahemla where the Nephite armies could better defend their peace-loving converts. So they move them over to the city of Melech, which we have identified as Bonaparte. So what were the motivations for the Lamanites and the Zoramites to be so against the Jershon occupation? Why did a move to Bonaparte make strategic sense? The evidences we have uncovered tell us that money and power were at the heart of the problems in Jershon. In recent years, the archaeological community has made good use of advanced satellite imagery. Through the interpretation of these images, it has now been determined that there were large cultivated green areas that were anciently terraformed and utilized with intensive farming practices. In Belize and southern Quintana Roo, they found commercial-like farms up to 500 acres in size that were irrigated and fertilized to produce large quantities of produce. But our research revealed a probable theory that may shock you. Remember the area referred to as Jershon? Satellite imaging has revealed several large commercial-like green areas, and they were scattered mostly in the northern part of Belize and some of it in the southern part of Quintana Roo. Some green areas are 500 to 600 acres. They have drainage and irrigation built into their design. That's huge. That's a huge farm. Why would you need something that large? They date around 300 BC. This is at least 150 years before any large cities were built here. Why? Why build such extensive farming areas so far from any city? We find our first clue in Antionum. Antionum was very much against Alma II sending anyone into Jershon. It appears as though their objections were based on the fact that they had cash crops growing in that region. During this same time period, we know that ancient Egypt had a large demand for American tobacco. At around 300 BC, up to 90% of the higher class and up to 60% of the lower class Egyptians were using nicotine on a regular basis. This is a huge revelation that no one has talked about. Why? Because it doesn't fit the narrative that the historical institutions have been espousing for the last 100 years. They cannot reconcile how American tobacco has made it to Egypt. They would rather try and invent some kind of plant that must have been growing somewhere in the Eurasian area that was providing that kind of nicotine content, but it isn't so. They have not been able to find that kind of plant. It is only American tobacco that has that. Here's how it happened. There was a lady who was doing a study in Berlin at the museum in the late 20th century, and this new hair follicle testing had come out, and she was testing it. She was seeing how this worked on the on anthropology and the ancient mummies, and lo and behold, she started finding they were all testing positive for nicotine, and some even were testing positive for cocaine. So this whole project was expanded, and it's been reproduced a couple of different times, and it all came out the same. They were using American tobacco. The evidence of nicotine addiction is shown to have lasted for at least 2 centuries, specifically from about 400 to 200 BC. This evidence implies that thousands of Egyptians over several centuries were continually using tobacco. This translates to tons and tons and tons of tobacco product. Nicotine at the levels found in these mummies are only possible if these Egyptians ingested tobacco either through chewing or inhalation. The tobacco plant is only found in the Western Hemisphere, and the larger quantities of it are only found in Central America and the Caribbean islands. But at the time, it was probably just Central America. Now, back to our Mesoamerican green areas. There are two types of green areas found in Mesoamerica. One is shallow at a depth of 12 to 18 inches, and the other is 6 feet deep. We can see here an example of irrigation canals that were built anciently. The differences between the two types of anciently built farming areas are clearly discernible. The shallow one is for food crops. The deeper one is for cash crops. Food crops are about 12 inches, maybe 18 inches deep. Cash crops are about 6 foot deep. The cash crop fields have very specific soil layering. The layers consist of an upper loam, then a loam and chert mixture, followed by peat, and finally a layer of clay. That's a very specific design, and it has a clay seal at the bottom, probably so that there's no water intrusion from below to help protect the plant. The cash crop fields were much more expensive to build. There had to be motivation beyond providing for tomorrow's meal. In other words, you're going to expend hundreds and thousands, actually, of hours, man-hours, layering something 6 feet deep over hundreds of acres. That's not so that you can cook a meal for tomorrow and have your tomatoes and your peppers and your corn and so on. Something else is going on here. All plant root systems will penetrate as deep as their DNA limitations will permit, but they actually need much less. And you can see here, they're showing that corn is 4 to 5 feet deep. Some of your small grains are 3 to 5 feet deep. Note that most root systems do not go lower than about a foot. You know, whether you're talking beans, amaranth, tomatoes, sweet potatoes, string beans. A perfect example is the tomato. The tomatoes grown centuries ago were not affected by root depth, and they're not today either. And even though they may have a taproot that can go as deep as 3 to 5 feet, all you need is a foot of well-aerated and watered soil, and a very bountiful crop can come from that. Tobacco is the exception to the rule. It needs a full 4 to 6 feet of soil to fully develop its leaves. Why do you want leaf development? The deeper root system provided more aromatic leaves for tobacco use. You want an okay so-so tobacco product? 18 inches. You want something that develops full leaves that are very plentiful and aromatic? Then you need 4, 5, 6 feet of soil in order for that root system to develop well. Tobacco is the only crop that requires a full 6 feet of root system above the water table, as the tobacco root is highly susceptible to rot when not properly drained. And this is why we believe they had that clay base on it. If the tobacco grown in this region is a cash crop for export, then the money to be gained from this industry provides the motivation to invest in the manpower to have the fields built and maintained. So, for centuries, Someone is shipping all of this in secret. If it weren't for the mummies, we wouldn't know that tobacco was making its way into the Middle East in BC times. But the evidence, the scientific evidence, is telling us there was shipping going on, and it had to be someone who doing it. It was taking it from Central America into the Mediterranean. Who would be shipping all of this material across the Atlantic? Who would have the trade routes established and the know-how to make it happen? It was the Phoenicians. How do we know? They told us themselves. This is a Carthaginian coin, and it is from the 341 BC period. This is right in the middle of the Egyptian trade period. It depicts a world map at the bottom. So they have this horse, which is the symbol of Carthage. They have this horse standing on top of a pedestal, but inside the pedestal, etched very small, is the world of influence that the Carthaginians have. And it's showing the Mediterranean and the islands in the Mediterranean. It's showing the upper portion of Africa. It's showing the Middle East area, the Asian area. It's showing Europe. It's showing the Isles of Britain around the isthmus there. And it's showing the Americas over on the left-hand side. There is a something that's indicating their influence beyond the Straits of Gibraltar. So, and it's beyond Britain and so on. So here, the Carthaginians are bragging, quietly, silently bragging about their world. The Carthaginians are standing on top of the world map. The Carthaginians are Phoenicians. We have evidence that they knew of the Mulekites. It appears that they brought the Mulekites to Mesoamerica at around 586 BC. Remember, we have the history of how the Nephites got here. The Nephites were led out of Jerusalem, and Nephi was shown how to build a ship. And they sailed that ship then to the Americas. We don't find out about the Mulekites until 300 years later or so in the Book of Mormon narrative. And then the Nephites find out that the Mulekites had also escaped Jerusalem, but they had escaped it at the time of its destruction. But there's no explanation as to how the Mulekites got there. This stela is called the Unfinished Stela, and it's found at the mouth of the Usumacinta River in Frontera, Tabasco, Mexico. In other words, where the Usumacinta empties into the Gulf of Mexico. It portrays the Mulekite immigrant story. The man wears a prayer shawl, prayer phylacteries on the wrist, holds a sacred copal bag, which is all those indicate that he is a priest or that he's a sacred individual. And he has an earplug with a shape alluding to the Star of David. In addition to that, that earplug is surrounded by a rope, which is a symbol of Phoenicia. Additionally, he is wearing a hat that resembles the top view of a two-masted Phoenician ship. It shows the two-mast in the middle, it shows the oars off to the side, and it has the bow and the stern. Top-down view. And the glyph blocks that surround this man have no glyphs, indicating that this people had no writing. All of this implies that it was Phoenicians who brought the Mulekites to Mesoamerica through the Usumacinta River. Phoenicians were the caretakers of the hidden trade routes. And What we believe is being implied here is there was already some kind of trade happening, whether probably with the Olmec coming into the Gulf of Mexico and then going back out through basically what would be called the Northern Passage, up the east coast of the United States, through Labrador, Newfoundland, then Greenland, Iceland, and then the British Isles, and then down the Iberian Peninsula and around into the Mediterranean. So somehow or another, there were already trade routes going on, probably with the Olmec. Why? Because the Mulekites, were told, landed first in a land where the Jaredites were at war. And then they went and they landed somewhere else. Well, the Phoenicians were probably like, this isn't a good place to stop. There's stuff going on. We need to move on. And probably then took them up the Usumacinta River. Therefore, we now have evidence from both sides of the Atlantic that trade existed. What do we have in Egypt? We have the tobacco plant. What do we have in the Americas? We have the San Bartolo murals, a Judeo-Christian sacred belief system that was transplanted from the Middle East into the Americas. If you're a Book of Mormon believer, you don't have to have that second piece to believe whether or not trade came from Middle East to the Americas in BC times. You already believe it. But if you're not a Book of Mormon believer, this is evidence that is compelling. We believe it was the monetary investment in these cash crop fields and their waterway connection to the Caribbean ports that angered the Zoramites, who stood to lose their industrial wealth and influence if they were denied access to the fields and shipping ports. Understand, we just went through how intensive building those fields must have been. You can't just go somewhere else and build another field and be up and running within a few weeks. They needed those fields. They needed those access ports. They needed to be able to go down the New River. And now I forget the name of the other river, the Hondo River, that have access into the Bay of Chetumal, where they could offload them then into larger boats that would go across the ocean. We believe that Alma was attempting to interrupt this commerce because he saw that the greed he found in Antionum was not healthy for the society at large. Eventually, it just made sense to move these peace-loving people out of harm's way, since their bonds prevented them from even defending themselves. However, it was not too long after the Ammonites are moved that the story on Alma goes dark. And I say goes dark is they assume he dies, but nobody knows exactly what happened to Alma. When he is gone, a man named Amalickiah sees his chance to advance his ambition and begins his move. Now enters a man named Captain Moroni, who leads the Nephites in an effort to thwart Lamanite aggressions. Even as Amalickiah is seeing his opportunity to restore the thriving Phoenician export industry, Captain Moroni is laying out the chess table to hold a solid front against the Lamanite armies. Moroni begins to erect cities along the east coast in the land of Jershon, from the Lamanite borders in the south to Bountiful in the north. Captain Moroni builds cities along the coastline of the East Sea, beginning in the south and moving northward until it reached the land of Bountiful, which we believe to be the Chetumal Bay area. Do we find evidence of this effort by Captain Moroni? Yes, we have found cities with sacred centers that all have similar designs. They are easily defended and for use by a people that are not literate. These two plaza design sacred centers imply that a belief system is embedded in their design. It is the story of their conversion. The similarity of the design attests to a single architect, or at least a single focus through multiple architects. This is a floor plan of CARTHAGINIAN. CARTHAGINIan is built on a very high mountainous area, and it's easily defended because it is the high point for several kilometers around it. On the left-hand side is a 4-pyramid area with a plaza in the middle. This plaza tells the story of where they came from and their conversion aspect. The plaza that's located in the upper right is the gospel story. And we're going to see that here in a few slides. We'll get to that at CARTHAGINIan. But it is the gospel story. So one plaza tells where they came from. The other is their belief system. Here at Shunan-Tunich, we have a plaza on the lower side that tells their story, and we have a plaza on the upper side that teaches their belief system. At El Pilar, on the upper side, the upper part of this, the north part, is where this teaches where they came from, who they are, and on the bottom is the teaching of their belief system. Altun Ha, on the upper side is a large plaza, and it teaches who they are, where they came from. On the lower side, it teaches their belief system. At Lamani, the lower side is where they came from. The upper side teaches their belief system. At Cuello, the side on the left, the plaza on the left, teaches where they came from. The plaza on the right teaches their belief system. And the design of the structures tell us that they used murals prolifically as the method of instruction. This is what we would expect in a society who needed to learn common truths, but were not literate. They couldn't do what Mosiah had done when he came into Zarahemla. Mosiah had the written record. All Mosiah had to do was write down the language and teach them how to read it. The Lamanites don't have a written language. Shunan-Tunich, El Pilar, and CARTHAGINIan clearly were large learning centers because of their mural room designs. Remember how the mural rooms were designed at Bonampak. This was the city of Melech, the city the Ammonites moved into when they left Jershon. So what they did when they moved to Melech is they brought with them their mural room concept and immediately built it and put the story of their conversion and their people's movements on the walls. Well, they're going to be doing the same thing with the gospel teachings. They're taking a Bible story or a gospel story, they're writing or painting the story on the wall, and then a person goes in and they get taught, and then they go to the next room and get taught the next lesson. Here at El Pilar, everywhere you see the darkened areas, those are rooms. Those are teaching mural rooms. There's probably 40 of them at this location. Here at Shunan-Tunich, where they're teaching their belief system, that's what this particular plaza is. Those are all mural rooms. This is at Shunan-Tunich. On the left is one of the rooms. Now, the upper part of the walls and the ceiling have all fallen away and they're eroded. But this gives you the basic idea of the design. You see where you step in and you're on a lower area. If you're a visitor to the room, that's where you're standing, is on the lower area. The raised area is all around where the walls are. That's where a priest would stand, and he would be assigned to teach that room for that day. And so you walk in as a visitor, and he begins reciting to you the story that's on the wall. This is El Castillo at Shunan Tunich, and it's showing you the different mural rooms that are located here. This is Caracol. Look at all the mural rooms that are there, and it's just amazing. All the different gospel stories that would be involved there. Again, this is also at Caracol, and you can look down and you can see the mural rooms that are in each of these areas. We now realize that the architecture is a fingerprint of the people who built them. They were an illiterate people who relied on the media of murals to illustrate what an assigned priest was required to lecture for that particular room. Your ability to verbally recite back to him that story demonstrated your progress. You were probably not allowed to move to higher levels until you had been sufficiently instructed in the foundational principles. You were instructed to build line upon line, precept upon precept, until your spiritual structure was complete. These were houses with many mansions, true learning centers. I'm going to show you specifically what's going on here at Caracol. This is the main plaza in front of the large structure that I showed you from Caracol. You start out on the plaza, you go up 5 steps. 5 steps. You're then on a small platform, and that platform is indicative of the world that we're walking through. You know, we talked about the 5 points. We walked through north, south, east, west, and then the center point where all of those connect. That is 5 points. So we walk through, on this plane of the earth, we walk through the plane of 5 points. From there, you go up 24 steps. 24. And it has a slight division of 12 and 12. It could be the 12 disciples of the Americas and the 12 apostles of the Middle East. Those 24 steps take you up to a series of doorways, of which there are 13. 13. There are 12 tribes, but once you factor in the Joseph split into Ephraim and Manasseh, you have a total of 13. So the possibility here is that the 24 steps brings you up to a teaching of the tribe of 13. Once you go through that level, then you go up 30 steps. 30 is the gematria number for the Hebrew letter Lamed. Hebrew letter Lamed is the center letter of the entire alphabet, and it is the letter for teaching, for being taught, mentoring, and so on. When you hit the top of the 30 stairs, there is a series of 7 doors. This particular illustration only shows you 6, but that is incorrect. There are 7 doors. 7 indicates completion, the end of a cycle. And I'm assuming at this point, because of what's beyond those 7 doors, that it's the end of the life cycle. It's the end of life, because once you go through the middle door of those 7 into that upper plaza, there are 3 temples. The one on the right is the shorter. I would assume that this is the telestial glory. The one on the left is the larger. As far as width is concerned, the steps are very wide. It is... I would assume that this is the terrestrial glory, and the one straight ahead is the tallest of all, and it has 33 steps to the very top. I'm assuming that this is the celestial glory. And you'll see here the configuration on this particular temple drawing. There are temple rooms or mural rooms everywhere. all the way throughout. And even back, in my Father's house are many mansions. I mean, there's all kinds of implications here about the spiritual growth and development of humanity. Again, the name of this structure is called Kana, which in Maya means the sky place. So this temple is a teaching of how to elevate oneself, or how to be elevated to the sky place. These sites and beliefs fit the description of the land of Jershon. They are designed for instruction of illiterate people. But do not let the lack of literacy fool you. They were very intelligent in how they demonstrated their knowledge of the gospel, and their industry testifies to their commitment and dedication. What I mean by that is, these were not slackers. Look at what they built and the short time that they were in that area. They were industrious. Once Alma had disappeared and was no longer the single, strong, unifying spiritual focus for the Nephite nation, a dissident royal named Amalickiah, who, by the way, we understand, we have found him. His name is Kanish Yashkukmo from Kopan, and his remains indicate that he is from Kalakmul. Amalickiah began plotting to recapture the industrial complex in Jershon. The usurper king who beheaded King Anti-Nephi-Lehi reestablished the Lamanite throne in KAMINALJUYU. The usurper king who beheaded King Anti-Nephi-Lehi, who, if you remember, we believe he was from Dos Pilas. He took that throne from TIKAL and reestablished the Lamanite throne in KAMINALJUYU, back up in Guatemala City. Amalickiah escaped from a failed attempt to grab the Nephite throne in the Zarahemla area, and he traveled to speak with the king of the Lamanites, which now is the usurper king, the one who had beheaded King Anti-Nephi-Lehi. And he got permission to gather together the Lamanite armies who would agree to fight the Nephites. Then, with the Lamanite army in tow, Amalickiah came to the king of the Lamanites and arranged to have him murdered. The Book of Mormon describes the king lying in his gore, having been stabbed and left to bleed out. We found a vase at KAMINALJUYU that appears to portray this very story. This pottery art illustrates a king who has taken the head of another and is now disemboweled. We believe this depicts the usurper king who was left lying in his gore. Notice the headdress that he has on, indicating that he's a king. He has the head of another on his belt. This is an act that he has committed. He has taken the head of another, and now he has his belly ripped open, and he's lying in his gore. Amalickiah then marries the widowed Lamanite queen. He begins to move his army into Jershon and reclaiming the cities along the coast. This was not as much to expand the Lamanite empire as it was to reclaim the industry, power, and wealth that had been curtailed among the Ammonites and Anti-Nephi-Lehi's because they moved into Jershon. Their presence disrupted the labor force and blocked access to the Caribbean ports. The introduction of the Nephite gospel changed the social dynamics. It enlarged the middle class and expanded opportunity. This was contrary to the caste system Alma found in Antionum, where there seemed to only be lower class poor and the very rich elite. And this is another statement about what Christianity does, because Christianity promotes equality among all individuals. We are all children of God. We are all equal heirs to the throne. Therefore, there's nothing that promotes equality within a social structure more than the introduction of the gospel. And Amalickiah and those who were wanting to maintain the status quo don't want this. This is a cancer in their power structure, in their wealth and industry. They can't have this concept. Amalickiah and his ilk longed to return to that system, as they all wanted to reclaim the power and wealth they felt they deserved. Amalickiah initially accomplishes his reclamation project only to be halted by the army of Captain Moroni. Eventually, the land of Jershon again comes under Nephite rule. The Maya cities found in Belize fit this pattern. It is a testimony to the human struggle between physical wealth and spiritual health. We now know that King Anti-Nephi-Lehi was beheaded, although the Book of Mormon never tells us what became of the contention from those who did not want King Anti-Nephi-Lehi to rule. Remarkably, this new information also helps us understand who was responsible for the slaughter at Ammonihah. It was Lamanites who had been duped by the Amalekites into attacking their own people. They were stung by the gravity of their crime for the killing of innocent Ammonites. They then exacted their revenge on the dissident Nephites, which are the Amalekites, at Ammonihah, and completely slaughtered their city. All of this has come forth as we have researched the parallels between the Book of Mormon Nephites and the Maya. There is so much more yet to learn, and we are in the midst of new information coming forth every day. Keep the faith, because God is keeping His word about making bare His holy arm. We only need to keep ours by working arm in arm with Him. So this completes presentation number 8 on the industrial complex that is Jershon. It is amazing comprehensive compilation of information that we have been able to compile. And it fills in so much in the understanding of not only what happened and some of the details that aren't given in the Book of Mormon, but why it happened. Why were there the social and cultural tensions involved there? Well, it all has to do with the same thing we deal with every day, which is trying to balance what is spiritually healthy versus the physical wealth that we're seeking to help take care of our families and so on. At what point is it too much? And at what point does the spiritual health begin to diminish? So amazing, amazing things. Our next presentation is going to be presentation number 9. We're going to move to Palenque, which we believe is the city Bountiful. Hope to see you in presentation number 9. Thank you.